what I've realized over time is that I learn more about myself through those than in any other situation in life. In any other situation in life, I could never learn that much about myself. And some stuff's not so cool. Some stuff is like stuff that I'm not super, super proud of. I'm like, oh, that's me. Like, that's who I am. Like, okay, like maybe this is something I want to work on, like maybe this is something that I want to change about myself. And it gives you an opportunity to look at yourself and be like, I want to be a different person, and like specifically for me in climbing and highballs and in competition, I wanted to be a person who didn't react poorly to things. I wanted to be a person who stuck to what I believed in, like no matter what, and was able to back those thoughts up with the choices that I make. And that's really hard. You don't realize what you react to until you're reacting to those moments.
Tim Kang, welcome to the Testpiece podcast, my dude.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not your dude anymore.
Still my dude, but
Nice.
welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
Tim, we've done a lot of podcasts together. We've explored a ton of ways to get better in climbing. I usually ask you to put your coaching hat on because you are a longtime coach. But today I want to talk to you more about yourself as a climber and just understand what makes you tick. And for those listening who maybe, I mean, we have a lot of new listeners, so maybe they don't know you as well as we might think they do. But for a little context, Tim, you're 25. You're 25 years old, which I think is quite young. You've been climbing for over half those years, and coaching or route setting for a good chunk of those years as well. But now you're a professional climber and also a coach. For me, I think you're probably most well known for your daring highball ascents, especially the ones that culminated in a film called Focus, where you climbed 5 of the absolute wildest and best known highballs in Bishop in a single day. But before that, I think you were more known as a competitive climber. You've been competing kind of since you started, and you've been on the World Cup circuit, of course. Uh, some of your hardest outdoor ticks include V14, 14D, flashing 514. Have you flashed V12, Tim?
I have flashed V12.
Ooh,
Show
good
of hands
job.
sit. That's the only one.
The,
I've had
the
a lot
World
of
Cup.
almost, but yeah.
Oh, those almost, they get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's my little synopsis of you, Tim. I know there's a lot more to you, so I want to make sure, like, do you think I missed any other highlights that, kind of showcase you and your career?
I mean, one little quick clarification. I've climbed for less than half of my life, actually. 12 years. I started when I was 13. But no, but thank you for the very nice intro. It's a little weird because yeah, we do this podcast together a lot, and we've already done like kind of a an interview episode with the Tim's Best Day podcast, but this is a little bit different. And but yeah, thanks for the intro.
I feel like that wasn't exactly an interview. That was an interview of that day, and that was focused. There you go. That was
Ha.
focused on your highball day in Bishop. That was recorded
Right.
in the film called Focus. And to be honest, Tim, that was one of my favorite podcasts we've ever done, and it actually was one of the things that got me even more psyched on podcasting than I was before because of just the honest raw storytelling that you did about what it was like climbing high off the deck and your mental state. That's still one of my favorite ones. I think it was number 28. I might just know that off the top of my head because it was
Whoa.
so good. I'll link in the show notes. Go check it out. It would be a great adjunct to what we're going to do here today.
Nice. But yeah, other than the intro, something that it was kind of interesting just hearing you talk about, my climbing life. It's just like how many places it's jumped, and definitely a lot of it was purposeful, like at the times. But yeah, like I said, like in hindsight now, I had no idea exactly what was the arc or why certain things went where. But I've done a fair amount of in the beginning. It was just an obvious place to go was competition, so it was what I did. But I fell in love with rock climbing outside. One of my first weeks climbing, I was because I got to go to Castle Rock in our local area, and then I was like, where do we keep going? And I fell in love. I've shared the story about Spectre, like seeing it on a magazine on the front desk of Sunnyvale and being like, I'm going to do that climb one day. And then, like literally in my first 3 months of climbing, one of the coaches on the team at Sunnyvale, which was a very good elite team at that time, approached me and my best friend at that time to join the team, or like, join them up for a day. And so it was crazy. It was just like falling in love with climbing, but all of it at once. And then like as competition climbing kind of went, like I remember getting into more like interesting comps. Like for example, I did Psicobloc, and I won it in Montreal like the first year that I did it. And that for me was like, whoa, there's so many different, emotions in climbing that you can really bring out. And I'd already been highballing a little bit, but that competition win, chasing something that I didn't ever expect myself to be able to do well. Because before that, I think I've shared the story before. Like I couldn't jump into water, like 10 feet. I did a 10-foot jump once into water, and it took me like 2 hours for my friends to like basically peer pressure me into doing it. So going from that to Sequel Block and climbing as fast as you can, 55 feet up, is definitely a pretty different feel. And then yeah, that just kept pushing into highballing, and it's interesting that you kind of also talk about the maybe the motives behind those things, and there's definitely something that gets it to tick. So it'd be fun to talk about it.
Yeah, you definitely set the stage for all the things I want to get into, and part of that sub thing going on there is that I know you well, Tim. I knew you when you first started climbing back, not quite half your life, but don't worry, it'll be there any day now. And you do think about climbing quite a bit and your why behind it, and you're not one to just kind of show up and say like, oh, like I don't know, I'm just here, we'll see what today brings. So I am interested in diving into that more. And I love that you brought out that Psicobloc comp, because I totally blanked on that, and that was a big moment when you won that. I can't believe that you were, I guess, scared to jump into water before that, because I've done a lot of deep water soloing. It is terrifying, and I love jump. I actually love cliff jumping. I did it before I ever even really climbed that much. But the side that I think people should understand is that Seeker block competitions are often a little bit more speed based than they are difficulty based. To be honest, those climbs are still probably pretty difficult, but you have to climb with a bit of reckless abandon when you go for speed. And so that's why I can't believe you're able to flip that switch. It definitely says something about you as a climber.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one thing that you mentioned there about the why, and how important that was to me, is definitely something that I think when you live your life, you just live it. Like you just are doing it. You're just making your choices every day, and like you're having your own reflections, and you try your best, and then at a certain point, and I think for a lot of other people, it comes maybe after a career, or like something is done, but for whatever reason, maybe podcasting a lot, or doing classrooms or coaching, or like yeah, coaching younger people and trying to like introspect for me and seeing like, well, what helped me, what hurt me, because if I can find those answers and experiences that worked or didn't work, I can probably help more people. And I think in doing that, I've realized a lot more about myself, and realized how significant the whys are for me. And that's actually mostly what I thought about. Mostly all of my action, choices for comps, choices for in the comps, like all related back to the whys. And that was really significant. And there's like no real reason why someone like me, the way that I approached water, or like jumping into water, or the fear of that, there's no reason why someone like me would go and do that comp, right? Because it was terrifying. And specifically, there's a couple of different, sorry, a little bit of history of Psicobloc, but when it started with Chris Sharma, starting Psicobloc in Salt Lake City, or in Park City, on in that classic Psicobloc venue, which was super cool. That route was really hard. I know that route was, for the men's, it was in the 514 range. I heard like low 514, upper 513 range. And that's just a totally different style. And the fastest you would see some of those guys go is like a minute plus maybe. And our route was probably like 511 minus. So much, much, much easier.
Wow.
And there was like dynos on it. Like it became strategy. Like Ben Hanna and I were I signed up for the event because Ben had won the event twice in a row, and they were paying $5,000 for the winner. And I was like, dude, there's like no climbing comp out there that's paying that much, so I'm gonna go and sign up for this event because I could beat Ben. I was totally joking at that time, but I was like, might as well try. Ben's a good friend of mine, but he's really good at that stuff. And we electric scooted over to the venue together before the comp happened, and we saw the route, and there was this big slot, like right in the middle, like a slotted hold. And like first thing we saw, we're like, how do you go fast if you have to like be accurate with a slot with your feet and your hands? And so right away I was like, there's a jug underneath it, there's a jug above it. why don't we just skip it? And he was like, dude, that's huge. And just stuff like that, like seeing it in terms of like, well, what's the optimal path? And then we spent a couple of practice runs like sizing up the dyno, like, being like, dang, is that something we're actually going to do? And then going from that to 3 or 4 days later into the final, being like, dude, that dyno is what you're going to do. You don't think twice. You go and you just go for it. And so turning all this information and guessing to like, what am I supposed to do that's optimal into commitment was a particular thing, and it took years and years and years of practice that led to a moment like that. Of course, it's not just like you can show up and do that. And so, but I wanted to, like, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be that guy who could show up to a moment like that and be like, no, I can do it, and I'm gonna go and try to do it. And I'm not ever afraid of the failure. I don't know if, I wasn't afraid that moment, and I think that helped a lot. Like, it's okay if it doesn't go right, but I'm gonna go for it. And so it was really fun.
Oh, that's an awesome story. Tim, I want to start this arc by starting out with your early climbing days. Uh, but before we do that, just because you kind of said something about seeing Spectre on a magazine in the gym, and Spectre is this really pretty steep climb in Bishop that starts on obvious hold. It's just like kind of a big steep boulder with some obvious holds on it, and so all that may make it sound like it's an obvious climb to do, but it sounds like you saw it when you were really really young, and I'm just kind of curious what grabbed you about it. Like, why was it that, oh, I want to do that one?
One of the main pictures that I saw was I'm pretty sure it was Magos like swinging off on it one armed, and I don't think that's like how he did it. I don't think that's how almost anybody does it. But there was just a cool picture of it, and then I saw more pictures of it, and then I remember watching Dosage, and definitely what got me really interested in Spectre. Well, first of all, seeing a rock climb like that, like an actual rock outside that, you know. I think at that time I still didn't really know what rock climbing exactly looked like. Mostly, I think what I saw was sport climbing, and I was like, "Ah, it's cool." Like you're doing the same thing that you're doing in the gym outside. That's really cool. But especially at that time, I was a V4 climber probably. I had never really done like crazy, like any real dyno or something would have been super spectacular to me at that time. And seeing a picture of somebody that looked that strong, like on a picture, on a climb like that, and it was outside, and the rock was just gorgeous, dude. Like that rock is, to me, it's gorgeous. Like the first time I saw it, and then realizing it was in Bishop, and I was like, oh, it says California. Like, where is that? And then looking it up, and then I found Dosage One, and then I watched Dave Graham do it, his FA, his story, and I was like, dude, like I wonder if it's that hard still. That was a big thing that I thought was like, Dosage came out even many years before I found it. And I was like, well, I was, again, still climbing like in the single digit numbers. And I was like, no chance I was going to do Spectre or anything. But I was like, I wonder if by the time I get strong enough to do it or good enough to do it, I wonder if it'll still be that hard. And I think that's like a really interesting thing about climbing is like, you always think that, in some way it's like, oh, dude, if I get good enough, like maybe it won't be that hard. And then you go and try lucid dreaming and you're like, oh, it's really, really, really hard. It's like, it's way too hard for me. And yeah, just seeing why it was hard, that's what really got me like turned on about Spectre. I was watching Dave Graham, and also Dave had a really similar build to me, especially at that time, just like, really lanky, couldn't really tell if he was strong or not. And just like his whole concept with Spectre that he was addicted to was like that tension seems unlikely. It's like holding your body in the air that far away with your feet that far away from you and reaching a hold that far away and all the holds are facing the same direction. It just seems so unlikely, right? And all these little clips of all these extremely strong, experienced climbers unable to do that position, not even remotely. And then eventually, Dave just like unlocking it. And the whole process of him unlocking it, like they don't make climbing films like that too much anymore, dude. Like, the really specific things that he was unlocking. And I was like, oh, dude, I really wanted to, I didn't necessarily want to experience what Dave experienced. I wanted to see if I wanted to see what I was made of, like I wanted to see if I could do that. So yeah, Spectre. Ugh.
Oh, what a good one. It's interesting when you put it that way about all the holds facing the same direction. It's really steep. The way it was classically done was with this low foot kind of toe jam kind of thing, and then you get really stretched out. And that's so classic Dave, where it's like this technical thing to unlock instead of just pure power. Although Carlo came on and then just crushed it by jumping through. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you connected with that so early on, that you were like, oh, like that problem solving. Even when you were a really young climber, I think that's interesting versus
Mm.
just when you see someone like Chris Sharma yelling and having giant biceps. It's pretty obvious why a 12-year-old kid or 15-year-old kid might be like, oh, well, that's cool because I mean he
Mm.
makes it look so cool. But that's an interesting thing about you that Dave Graham was someone you were instantly attracted to, his climbing style. Um, all right, well then let's start there, man. You got into climbing around 13. It sounds like 12 or 13. What were you doing before that, and why do you think climbing stuck with you over the long haul?
Yeah. So yeah, Josh and I talked about this a little bit, and I'm gonna preface by saying it's a little bit for me a little bit embarrassing, but we're gonna share the story. But I think every kid was probably like this. So when I moved to the Bay Area with my mom and my brother, I was 8, and I had kind of jumped into a lot of like we moved into the pastor's house because we didn't have a place to live. We kind of like were on the run a little bit from New Jersey because my mom had a bad relationship, and so I was like literally pulled from my third grade Halloween party, and I was like in my Scream costume, I remember, and like all my shit was packed up, and we were going to the airport, and I was like, I don't know where we're going. Like I've done this before, I moved very rapidly before that too, like moving away from my dad. And then when we showed up to the Bay Area, like it was a whirlwind, like making friends. Like I don't know where we were going. We're going from a church to this pastor's house, and then we're like, oh, we're all three of us are going to live in this room now for I don't know how long, and we just did that, and we kept moving rooms to be comfortable, and then, eventually we had an apartment. But during that time, moving schools was really difficult for me. But I think I just like took it head on, and I was always a smiler. Like I always just like had the biggest smile, and I always like wanted to make as many friends because my older brother struggled with that a lot more. Like he didn't really. I don't think he struggled making friends, but he didn't really want to at a certain point, which is for me like totally reasonable. Like just like felt exhausting, and he had like good friends that he was moving from, and so I learned from that, and I was like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be unhappy or angry at any point. So I just wanted to make a bunch of friends, and I think I started to naturally think like what got me friends was like doing stuff that was impressive. And so in a weird like twisted inauthentic way, actually, like early on, I did everything just to like be impressive or like to stand out. And for me, what was really interesting, but then it was kind of funny because like anytime I got into something, like interested into something that was maybe just impressive, it also turned out that they were very interesting things and they were very fun. So that's why it was a jump back and forth between like to me things that were inauthentic and then things that were super authentic and really confusing. But the first thing I got into really early on was basketball, and playing that, at recess and elementary school with my friends. I realized I was pretty good at it, and like just really enjoyed like all of the things basketball. I started to watch a lot of basketball and just realized like how. I don't know, like even looking at high schoolers and seeing like basketball jocks, like they just looked like they weren't like football jocks, like for whatever reason, the stigma was like football jocks look like, they don't know anything, but basketball jocks like still, get all the chicks and like look popular, but they also look like smarter. I don't know. I just like made these like really strong stigmas about those types of people. And literally that's what got me like really interested and actually very dedicated into basketball, because then I kind of took the steps and I was like, well, if you want to be recognized, like you got to be, I kept doing that. And I was like, if you want to be recognized in basketball, like you got to make the NBA. It's like, oh, you got to make the NBA like that. Okay. That's a crazy amount of qualifications and steps, but you know, you just get to a place of what am I going to do today as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, or 10-year-old that's going to get me there. And I would practice a ton, like before and after school, like all sorts of stuff. I would stay after practice, like all whatever for basketball. I also got into guitar like really early on. Like right when we moved there, my mom was doing a lot of church programs, like day camps, after school programs, and they were all associated with music because my mom was a singer for a long time, since she was like 5. And the program offered like you could pick a bunch of different instruments, and literally the reason why I picked guitar because I was like classically you can impress chicks playing the guitar, not the trumpet. So I picked up the guitar, and I still play it today. I still like it a lot. But that transformed into a bunch of stuff. Sorry, this is going to be a lot of different tangents, but I joined. I started a band with my best friend at that time when we were like 13. So I was climbing a little bit when we were doing the band stuff, and we competed like battle the bands. We were writing a lot of original songs. We were playing like indie rock music in his garage, and so guitar stuck with me for a long time because again I liked guitar. Like I liked the guitar and I thought it was cool. But honestly, most of my drive from it was this again inauthentic to me, just to be impressive. And so I think that's why it also like fell apart, and so did basketball. And then I started skateboarding, and like skateboarding again was the same thing. It was like, dude, it's just like sick. It's cool. Like you look cool, and it's just like a badass feel, at least to me. And I wanted to keep doing that. And then basically from skating, it kind of went into like free running parkour for a very short period of time with the same friend that I had that band with, and his name was Sam Lobach, and we both saw climbing just on a picture on an ad, and we were like, dude, is there a place to like go climbing? And we looked up, climbing places, and Planet Grant Sunnyvale was like 10 minutes away. So then when we went there, and so it's all,
Wait,
yeah,
Tim, I think you blew it. If you were trying to get nosed and get chicks and make money, guitar, even football, yeah, basketball, skating, all way better choices. But I'm glad that you ended up going into climbing, and what a lucky coincidence that you were 10 minutes away from arguably, especially back then, one of the best gyms in the country, and full of
yeah,
a lot of really psyched younger climbers too. So, okay, so you set foot into Planet Grant Sunnyvale, beautiful, beautiful gym, and yeah, was it love at first climb, or how'd that go?
yeah. I think I've talked about this before, but I'll happily share it at any point in time. Like, what it's kind of a story, but I'll try to keep it brief. But I walked in with Sam, and I think we biked there from his house, and we just instantly walked in. We're like, dude, like I was definitely love at first sight. I saw the first pillar, like it was the top rope wall that I saw first, and I was like, that is insane. Because you had seen like at fairs and stuff, like the small climbing walls, but you're like, wow, it looks like there's actually like set climbs. You can see that right away. And back then they had tape, and you could see like lines and colors and stuff. And you're like, wow, like there's a whole place for this. It's like we at before that. Sam, on the weekends, we would just climb trees and like bring snacks up on the trees and like, all sorts of different stuff. Like we were literally doing all the climbing stuff like on our own time. Like we would get in trouble climbing buildings and whatnot too. And so that was all just for fun. And so to see a place that had that was so, so special. And then we basically Planet Granite Sunnyvale has, I think, still to this day, a pretty strict waiver policy. And so, at least back then, if you were under 18, which we both were, you needed your waiver signed by your parents. But then your parents had to show their physical ID before, like in person, before you like got in. And my mom was doing like a bunch of church stuff, so there was no way she was going to come like anytime soon. So Sam's dad came, and he was cleared, and he started climbing and stuff, and then I had to sit and wait in the lobby for like hours before my mom came. And so like not only was it love at first sight, it was just like I was just getting teased the whole time. I was like, dude, I want to climb so bad. And I remember my mom showed up, and she liked it too. She saw it, and she was like, that's pretty cool, like, and she was pretty psyched on it right away. And my mom also started climbing like probably within a year after that, and she still climbs now, and she still coaches a lot in climbing. She's super into it. And yeah, we just like got into it, climbed for a ton of hours. I remember that first day we did top rope because his Sam's dad like was like, oh, you guys want to try the rope, because like somebody needed to get belay certified. So he was like, oh, I can go get belay certified, and you guys could just go climb on top rope. And I was like, actually fell in love with top rope the first day, like a lot more than bouldering. But then we just ended up bouldering a lot more because they were quick challenges. And do the same thing, we were talking about with Spectre. Like I remember specifically one, it was yellow V2, and it was like on that wall by the outdoor like training area, not the outdoor bouldering area, but the outdoor training area, like in the front. And it was on that vert wall. And I remember there was like basically like two or three holds on it, and it was just like your classic sandbag V2 with like these weird dynamic movements. And I couldn't do it the first day. And I remember that was the first experience that I had of like something I couldn't do in climbing. And before all of that, I think Sam and I just had a lot of tolerance for failure, and just like using failure to learn things. And what a perfect, just it was a perfect like chemistry for that, like failing on something and being like, literally had to come back the next day. I did that V2, and just that cycle, like, oh, I couldn't do it, I got to do it. And then just I would never leave a challenge undone. I would find challenges that I couldn't do and just get them done until they were gone.
Mm, that sweet, sweet top rope pillar. I'm sure you. I know which one you're talking about, and it's. I mean, one of the things about Plant Grant Sunnyvale, which is I guess now Movement Sunnyvale,
Uh-huh.
is it's big and it's tall and it's impressive. I remember going in there. I went to school in Santa Cruz, which was over the hill, and I drove over the hill, went in there for the first time, and it is inspiring. It was one of I love gym climbing, and I think gyms like these really bring out something in you that is awe and impressiveness. And you the reason why I give you crap about that top rope pillar is because right behind it is a lead cave that's really tall and really impressive, right? I love the
Yeah, I
lead
almost
wells there.
almost never ended up climbing on that pillar like ever again.
Yeah. uh, so I love that thing you said where you had a challenge, you couldn't do it, and you came back and did it, and that cycle is never ending. And so I know that you basically lived there and trained really hard, but there's a big shift in all of us where it goes from kind of this is something that is fun and cool to I'm all in. And I'm just kind of curious about what you know when that switch went off in your head, because I love when you were talking about basketball and you talked about, oh, if I want to be impressive, be one of the best out there, that means the NBA. And then you said, and that trickles down, or not trickles down, but that sets the tone for what I do today as a 8-year-old. But that thinking is really important. Where it's, where am I going with this? And so I'm just curious about if you remember that moment where you're like, oh, I'm gonna really go for it. And yeah, do you remember when that
Oh yeah.
happened?
Yeah, there were different moments for sure, but the first one was very, very similar to that basketball moment where, I think after our very first day climbing, Sam and I watched almost everything you could watch on YouTube that night, and we were just up for hours and hours and hours watching. Like the very first thing we watched was The Insiders, and that was I don't even know if it's on YouTube anymore. I think you could probably find it on Vimeo. I know the Louder Than 11 stuff or Big Up Production stuff like moved or whatever. Maybe it is still on YouTube, but The Insiders was basically like Vasya Vorotnikov, Sasha DeJulian, Dave Wetmore was in there, like campus boarding and stuff, which was dope.
That's right.
Chris Danielson was setting for Paul Robinson and Daniel Woods. Ashima was in that clip. Like you could see at that time, like almost everyone who was great just climbing on plastic. And it was just so cool. Like, dude, P Rob was climbing on a really hard looking route, like a sport route. And like that's not ever what you see on with P Rob anymore. You see a bunch of bouldering.
Wasn't there a lucid dreaming simulator in there too?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
that's
was a like
classic.
that it was so cool because that I remember that clip was part of like Paul's lucid dreaming part, like for Real Rock. And I think they just used that in the Insiders, which was just like so spectacular, dude. Like such an underrated amount of like history and just like, expertise in that little short film. But that was one of the first things that we ever watched. And then I remember specifically Dreamcatcher after that. And like biography, uh, Witness the Fitness, like all sorts of different Sharma classics. And so to answer your question, watching that, I knew what a lot of at that time specifically, especially because competition wasn't so like mainstream for climbing back then. Like youth stuff was pretty serious, I think, still, but like nothing really huge. You wouldn't like the whole world wouldn't be watching World Cups. I think you just like knew that they were happening. Um, but yeah, just seeing like the outdoor climbing and that's how indoor climbing was back then, a lot more like the indoor climbs were just like in a lot of ways just mimicking the outdoor climbs, and the grading was the exact same. Like it was pretty stiff back then, so if you like did something indoors, like probably were doing that outdoors. It's not necessarily the case today. And the style was like very, very correlated, so you could literally go into your gym and be like, dang, okay, well, like I just saw Sharma do this V15, so if I can get to like 10, I'm probably on track. And it was the same thing. I just recognized that V2 took me more than a day to do my first time. I recognized that I sucked and I wasn't very strong, and like it would take me loads and loads of time and expertise to really get to that level. But at the same time, like my understanding of Sharma was very impressed. I was like, dude, that guy is so good at what we're doing or what we're trying to do. And it's the same thing that I was telling you about basketball, dude. Like, if I wanted to get to that level, and if I got to that level, I would be like the most impressive to me, to like other people. And that mattered to me a lot when I was younger. And I thought that finding things that were actually very, very difficult and required like an extreme level of mastery, that was starting to get really attractive to me. And so specifically climbing, I was like, dude, this is so hard for me, but then I can, once you define the level that's like very, very far away from you and you try to understand if there's like a realistic path for you just get addicted, and you're like, what are going to be all these like, because you also have a small belief, or at least I did, that I could do it better and quicker than Sharma, because he was older than me back then. So I was like, dude, obviously if I do it better, I could get to his level quicker and better and maybe get past his level, right? And I think that's how a lot of kids think, like at that time, if they're really dreaming big, they look at who the best person is and they're like, I'm gonna beat that goat, like LeBron and Kobe and Jordan, it's like they want to play with each other, they want to play against each other because they want to be like, I'm pretty sure I'm made of more than you, and like getting to that place in life with other human beings, I think was like super special for me ever since I was a kid. And like I said, it changed a lot over time through different, mostly failures, different like, I'm gonna go for this thing and climbing and then fail. And I had, for me, like maybe failures that were too big to swallow for a long time, and that totally changed a lot of my path. And Spectre being a large one, Spectre took me 7 years. Not necessarily 7 years of dedicated projecting, but from the moment I tried it to the moment I did it, it was a 7 year path. And so of course I would show up, and I even quit on it. One of the season, the session before I did it, I quit, and it took me 2 years to get back to it. And like just having that time, and see, like all of that changed a lot about like how I looked at life and climbing and training and all that stuff.
I'm kind of curious how you had put basketball on a pedestal, maybe guitar playing too, and these things have really obvious histories in being quote unquote cool. When you started getting into climbing, and I'm guessing not a lot of people around you climbed, or I mean, a lot more people. When you walk, if you look out your door, there's a good chance you'll see someone playing basketball. And if you were to walk up to a random person on the street, even nowadays, and said Chris Sharma, they wouldn't. But if you said Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, they would know who you're talking
Yeah.
about. How did that factor? Like, did climbing seem cool? Like, so in your younger kid brain, where there's some kind of stuff about doing the thing that is cool, and being associated with it, being good at it. Like, how did climbing fit in there? Because I think the reason why it's an interesting question for me is that when I started climbing, it really wasn't cool at all. And so I'm just kind of wondering how that fit into your head, and if it attracted you for, yeah, why it attracted you.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why I still do it today. Because I think I realized immediately that it wasn't very cool for a lot of people, and all the way until I graduated high school. Like nowadays, I'm getting messages from my high school friends who are like climbers now, and they're like, oh my god, I'm so jealous you found it so long ago and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I really like this thing like for a long time, and I'm very glad that I found it, at the time that I found it. But at the same time, I wish I found it when I was younger, like everybody thinks, but it was that thing, like maybe being like me being certain that it would be cool for me or like my closer peers, that if I got really good at this thing in climbing, that mattered to me a lot more, versus like I think I was very aware that like we knew these icons in basketball, like we knew the Kobe's and the Michael Jordans, and in guitar, like some of my favorite guitar players, a lot of the whole world would know as well, and like I think I got too attached to those icons even in these other activities that I was doing. Even in skateboarding, like everybody knows who Tony Hawk is, like the guy's like super, super famous, in a sport that arguably is like at a similar level to climbing, but maybe you just see skateboarding more often, like around, in public. So maybe you just know skateboarding more, but you're totally right. Like most people, maybe nowadays it's different. Like in this specific couple of recent years, it's different, but definitely 10 years ago, yeah, I mean, climbing was like, oh, you climb mountains, like you go up Everest and stuff, was like constantly what I would hear in school if like I said, oh, I went climbing this whole last weekend or whatever. Um, and yeah, just like maybe turning that into like, oh, this is my own, and like this is something that maybe people don't get. It didn't matter to me anymore. What mattered to me was I know it, I know it pretty well now, and I know how impressive it would be to get masterful at this thing. And I think also another part of me that's kind of interesting believed that if I got really good at it, I could push the sport I actually thought about this a lot when I was young. Like, if I got really good at it, I could eventually push the sport to a place where a bunch of other people who had never seen it before or never knew about it, they could get into it and they could really know, because it's exactly how I got into it, right? It was on accident. And so getting more people to know about climbing on accident, the chances of, younger kids or just adults, honestly, finding it on accident and getting super into it, which is what happens a lot nowadays, I think is what I was very interested in, is like, can I be an icon for this sport? You know?
I think one of the reasons why these sports have blown up that are not so traditional, like the football, basketball, is that it would be great if you were born 7 feet tall and basketball just
Hmm.
fit you, but you could be the most gifted person in basketball. And if you're 5'2", I mean, I know there's maybe like Spud Webb or there's some like exceptions out there, but it's nice when you recognize that there's uh, outside of that normal paradigm of football, basketball, baseball, perhaps there's other sports with body types that can excel. And like Dave Graham was never going to be a football player. I don't know,
Yeah.
just like, and I don't think he would disagree with that. But he's literally
Yeah.
one of the best climbers that's ever walked the face of the earth. And so,
Wow.
yeah,
Can I? That actually, yeah, that actually reminds me a lot of like early on. I was a really, really insecure kid with just like my look. When I started climbing, I was 13 and I was kind of a late bloomer. It was 4'11", 4 foot 11 and 70 pounds. It was very, very small. And I couldn't even like hang on the bar for like a minute, like, or like 30 seconds. I couldn't even hang on the bar, much less do a pull up. There's no chance of me doing a pull up like the first couple times I went climbing. Couldn't do that many push ups like at all. Very, very, very scrawny, like weak kid. Even if I was playing, even though I was doing stuff like basketball, like I was never working out. I was like training basketball and like doing a lot of cardio and running and jumping exercises. Um, and just like there was two things with climbing that really stuck with me early on. I was like, it's a very heavy upper body sport, and so if I did it, I would probably get yoked and like look like Chris Sharma. That never happened. I'll just tell you that. But at the same time, I was like, finally something I can fit in, and like I had done like even Taekwondo before, and that didn't even work out for me. Like my mom put me in Taekwondo because I wanted to do some fighting, and she was like, I don't want you to fight, but I'll let you do Taekwondo. And I was like, all right. And even that, I was like, I don't know, I felt very weak. Like I just felt so weak. And in climbing, it was so weird that feeling weak was almost like the answer to your progress, being like, oh, I'm sucking at this. There's a path forward. Like I should just work on that. And for whatever reason, it spoke to me a lot more easily that way, where it's like, you suck at this, go do this work, and I was like, what's the work? And I just would start, every single time that happened to me, I would create a workout or a training plan. And that's what I did for 10 years.
I know you just kind of expanded on this, but can you say that again? You said being weak is kind of the path itself in climbing. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there was a lot of like, Sam, my friend that I started climbing with, for whatever reason at that time was a lot stronger, just like immediately in climbing. And he did climb a lot better than me. And it was cool that we had like the ability to just compete right next to each other, because we were like very good friends. And he always beat me in a competition, but we were also the same age. So that alone showed me a lot that I was like behind in some ways. And so I think it just like kept me very, it kept me humbled. I was like, I'm definitely not that good. Like my friend who started at the exact same time, who's been doing this the exact same amount of time, is beating me all of the time. And so I could recognize the physical component right away. We did a lot of the same climbs together. I'm like, oh, I could try this movement 10 tries in the same way that Sam's doing it. And I was even at that time, I think I was starting to get taller. Because by the end of my first year climbing, I was 5'8". So I grew 9 inches in 1 year. Yeah,
Okay.
I grew I grew like freakishly quickly, but I never had like growth spurts or anything like that. I grew like an inch a month for like a whole year. Um, and so it was very steady growth, but eventually I got like even more reachy than Sam, and I still couldn't do a lot of the moves that he was doing. And I recognized that he had like bigger shoulders and like bigger biceps, and that helped a ton for climbing. And I was like, huh, I wonder how you get those. And I started to just wonder a lot, like I wonder why that helps him do this move. And I just watch it and look at it, and we had a lot of really, really, really strong people. Like I was watching this kid Mirko Caballero, that a lot of you listening probably don't know him, but at that time he was going to be the next Adam Andra, who was going to be the next Chris Sharma. Like you could see it, you could see like the path where you're like, oh dang, like Adam Andra is gonna dethrone Sharma eventually. He's just so good. And Mirko was the same for probably Adam Andra at a certain point in life. I mean, he was the youngest person to do a V14. I think still. Um, and he had his whole like, life thing that happened. But at that time, this kid was doing like weight vest laps on like 4x4s on V8, which is still to this day like absurd. And so watching all of that and like, and he was skinny, but like I could see his muscle. Like I could see the muscle that really mattered for climbing. And again, I was like, dang, like every time I was too weak to do something, I'd be like, well, I'm not going to gain the muscle tomorrow, and I'm not going to gain the muscle the next try. So what could I do if I didn't have the muscle? And then I would go off and do the work to get the muscle, and then I would come back and be like, okay, cool, like I can start answering some things. And it was a long, 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 long process, right? To be like, oh, what muscles correlate to what success in climbing, or what types of things. It was a lot of studying, and like yeah, most of it was just studying.
Tim, I know that you went through a really intense training phase during that time, and you may not have bulked up to the sheer muscle size as someone like Chris Sharma, and not too many have. But I know that you are really strong on things like one arm pull ups and push ups and dips or muscle ups. That kind of classic calisthenics. Uh, when you think of yourself as a climber today, do you do you think of yourself as a strong climber, a weak climber? Like how where are you at 13 years later, 12 years
Hmm.
later?
I think of myself nowadays more balanced. Like I don't think of myself as strong or not strong, or like technical or not technical, or like aggressive or slow or smooth or whatever. I think of like requiring. I think of myself as like a climber, like recognizing things that need to happen and trying to see what I have that can make that happen the best way at any given point. And so if I'm like low on endurance, like I got to go a little bit faster. Like if I have tons of endurance, I can answer questions a little bit more deeply on the wall and stuff. Like it's just a given path that makes the most sense in any given moment. And I answer those questions and find those questions a lot more accurately nowadays, I think. So I don't need the what we call it, the buffer. Like I don't feel like I need the buffer very much, and I don't want to rely on the buffer. And the buffer takes a lot of work that is not spent climbing, and I have different life things that like take the time away from climbing. Like the amount of time I would be in the climbing gym or in a climbing area, nowadays versus when I was a kid, or even until literally I was like moving away from Salt Lake City. I would literally be at the gym, 30 to 60 hours a week, and not all of it was climbing, but I was definitely studying climbing the whole time, whether that be in the gym and being like, oh, why do those workouts translate to something else? Or just watching climbers or climbing or making up climbs for my friends or whatever. Like I was doing it all of the time and coaching.
I don't know if we actually tackled this earlier. Did you say when you kind of flip the switch into going all in? I maybe I forgot. We go off onto
Oh,
tangents,
no.
but yeah.
But yeah, yeah. No, but that was, yeah, it was kind of correlated to like kind of what I saw, the similarities and the differences, the major differences from like my interaction with climbing versus all the other sports that I was doing. But I think I was all in on anything that happened. Like I don't know what it was, man, and I still maybe in some way I can give you like likelihoods of like, oh, this is what I've gone through, or like these are my philosophies as to why I always believe in these things. But even in relationships, I was always like this. In like work or like whatever, and maybe a little more cleaner to explain the whole picture. Like I was also like that in the opposite way, where if I didn't believe in something or I didn't want to do something, I was all out, and so and that's what was really confusing to me was that being all out in places like school, like teachers would go up and tell you like what they think, and they're like, you're gonna fail at life, like essentially a very, very a lot of the most of my teachers would tell me stuff like that, right? It's just like, dude, like you got to be careful like building those habits because they amount to failure, like all these things. And I was like, I'm not going to fail. Like I have something that I like doing and I'm going to put all of my eggs into this basket, and I think that's how I should live life. And so I was just really sick of, I had really bad problems with teachers and like authority and anybody who was above me because they would tell me things based, it's fine if somebody tells me their experience, but they would tell me a likelihood of experiences that might happen based off of like behavior that they're seeing. I'm like, that's a bad recognition of what the behavior that you're seeing is. And so I all of that mixed together, like when I got to climbing, I was like, I believe in me to do this. I believe in if I go in all in. And it was literally probably day one where I was like, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna go all in on this. And it was a mixture of like everything that we were just talking about, falling in love with it for sure, like just knowing that it was very cool for me and it was very fun, knowing that being good at it and mastering it eventually would be impressive, whether it just be impressive to me or like my local community or to like people who don't know the sport at all. That was important to me. And, just continuing that path, I knew that if I went all in was the only way that would happen.
Well, I think I've always really enjoyed about your approach to climbing. It kind of comes out there where when you say you're all in and you want to master climbing, you definitely were able to think about it in this, I was going to say nuance, but it's almost like a collective way where I need to get stronger, I need to get technical, I need to put in the time, I need to do these million things, and I think it it shows something interesting where when you decided to get as good as you could at climbing,
Mm,
you really were open to whatever that meant, right? It wasn't just
yeah.
like I'm going to really do a lot of muscle ups, which you did a lot of muscle ups, but I think it's something I've always enjoyed speaking with you about is it's not this thing, it's not that thing, it's everything. And then that
Yeah.
point of view allows you to pursue everything with the vigor required and not get sucked into one rabbit hole too much. So just wanted
Yeah.
to say that
That's a
back to you
good point.
because I love it.
Well, yeah, that actually got me thinking about one experience that definitely I chose to go all in. It was my first regionals. I got, like I said, coerced to like join the team, and like literally, it was like that. It was like, oh, you guys would like this, and we're like, okay. And I remember the story is kind of funny. So the coach that saw me the first time with Sam, he saw, I think Sam and I were just like, close to the team every now and then. Like every time they would practice, we'd be like, oh, like what are they saying? Like, oh, we should try this. What's a flag? Like, oh, back flag, like turn. Oh, what is that? Like, and we had a couple of really interesting coaches. Travis Boer was the guy who came to me, and he was just like such a stoker. Like he was so psyched, and he was like, "Oh, guys, like come join." And then there was this guy named Ford Merrick who was just like an absolute technical wizard. Like he just like always the guy doing all the footwork techniques. He was really good at drop kneeing and all sorts of footwork things, and he climbed really slow and static. And so we were watching that, and then there was this head coach named Isaac Williams, like big burly black dude who just like didn't seem like he would be your climbing coach, but he just had this aura that was very like serious, and also like he cared a lot. And right away it was like I was like, this is a family that I want to be a part of. And so the story is kind of crazy, and I'm not sure if this is like okay to share, but we're gonna share it. So I wanted to join the climbing team right away. I was like, yes, get me in there. We did they didn't do this, like we found this out later, but they didn't like do this type of thing. But they were like, okay, we're gonna do a team tryout. So Sam and I, showed up on a Monday for the team tryout, and they're like, and everyone was like, what are we doing? And Isaac's like, we're doing a team tryout, and they did like just a bunch of workouts. We started the day with like this thing called half hour of power, which was an insane workout that we did before the climbing day. We did all sorts of climbing drills, workouts, and everything, and then we ended with another workout. And I remember like I think it was Nate Linden who was like, we called him King Booch for a while. He was like our leader for the group. I think he came to us after. He's like, that was the hardest day I've ever done on team. Thanks, guys. We're like, oh, like they really wanted to push us and like see what we were capable of. And we did great. Like we were super psyched. We're like, get me in there next day. And so we talked to the manager after, and we're like, all right, how much is team? And they were like, it's like 240 a month. And I was like, oh, I don't think my mom's ever paid that much for anything for me. Actually, like we don't have that much money, like we moved here to like live at the pastor's house in one room, like I knew we didn't have that money. So I was like, dang, like that sucks. Like I guess I'm gonna be that guy who just climbs, like on the side, watches the team and like tries to do what they do. But Sam's, he's fine. Like I'm sure they can afford it, so they're gonna go and do it. But like Sam and I will be friends. I'm gonna just do what I do in climbing, and like good luck. And then Nick could see that. Nick Gerard was the manager, and he knew that I was psyched, and he knew the team, and like they had been talking about it a lot. And so he was like, dang, like Timmy said he can't join. And so they came to me and said like, hey, we would like to offer you if you and Sam paid for one person's team. He gave me half off and Sam half off. And I was like, okay, like I can call my mom and see if she's psyched. And I called her, and she was like, oh my god, like I guess that'd be really hard for me still, but like let's just make it happen. They really obviously like care about you and like want you to do it. And so we joined the team at half the price, and we paid that until I was done with the team, which was super gracious of them. And yeah, sorry, I was gonna say that got me into competing right away, because that's what we did, right? That team was the competitive team, and so everything that you did lined you up for the competitions because the season was like black and white. Like you knew when regionals was, you knew when divisionals was, you knew when nationals was for both categories because you did a bouldering season and a sports season. So your whole year was lined up. Like you knew that you were going to train, you knew you were going to compete at these times, and it just so happened we were signed up for team right before regionals. So I've been climbing for a couple of months. I climbed V4 at the maximum, and they were like, "Yeah, sign up for youth regionals." And I was like, "Okay." So we go to regionals, and Sam does really well. He makes it to divisionals, which I think was top 7 back then. He qualified for divisionals his very first time, which was in Seattle. You go to Vertical World. Drew Ruano was there, and like you knew already who that was. And I was like, dang, like that. Well, I didn't at that time, but people knew. And it was just a serious divisionals. Sam got to go. He showed me lots of videos, but I didn't. I got second to last at that regionals. And I went home and I cried like a lot because I, at the comp and in ISO and like preparing for the comp, I really didn't care. Like I was like, oh, I'm so excited. Like I'm so excited to climb. And I remember like turning around for my first couple of climbs, like how cool it was. And I remember the shift from being cool. Like I was like, there's only one climb on the wall. Like there's a time limit. Like I get tested on my tries and my failures. And then getting to a climb where I couldn't do it. I couldn't even start it. Like I didn't even know what I was supposed to do because there were 6 boulders and they started to get really, really hard. Like at that time, it was boulder was chill, like V2, V3 to start. The next one was chill, like V3 or V4. And then it just got really hard after that. Like they wanted you to succeed and then they wanted to test the rest of the people to like qualify. And I didn't know that. I didn't have very many expectations. And just like, I think getting super shut down, I just was like, dang, like I really am not good at this. And seeing exactly how I got shut down, watching other competitors after that, I was like, dang. So I honestly got into like a really dark place after that. And I was like, I'm not really good enough for this. Like, that's way too hard for me and stuff. And I cried in the shower for like a long time. And I was just like, dang, like, okay, like if I signed up for that thing the next year, I'm making divisionals. And I just kept doing that. Like every single time I failed and had an event that didn't go well, I would actually get super down on myself. Like I almost expected myself to do well, which hurt a lot. And then I would like hit, a dose of reality and just be like, you weren't good enough. And but do you want to be good enough? Like do you want next time to have a different experience? And just giving myself that control, that's really when I decided to go all in. Like I think I recognized what was required to go all in and like be great, but I didn't really feel the choices, I didn't feel the direction for those choices until I failed. And I was like, you gotta make something happen here, dude. Like if you really want to go to these things and do what you want to do.
That's heavy, dude. Uh, it's also really interesting where in some ways I think maybe you can't go all in on something until you fail because you're gonna fail. Like you're gonna fail. Chris Sharma fail. Everyone fails, and it does seem like what separates the good from the great are those who fail and then say, "Okay, I'm in it. I know it's go. Oh wait, this is going to be hard. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I'm signing up for. I'm signing up for it to be hard." So that's interesting, man. Well, so you started doing competitions, and yeah. So were you doing any outdoor climbing at that point? Like, how did you view competitions? Like, were you excited by them? That they're definitely an offshoot of indoor climbing. Well, I mean, they take place indoors, or at least the ones you're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
how did you think of did competitions become what climbing was to you at that point?
Yeah, so there's 2 different things that you're talking about there for outdoor climbing and competition climbing, which was very specific at that time. There was a lot of things going on in the world of climbing, I think. Like for one, well, the first thing was that me and you, Josh, are similar in this way, where no matter what I was doing, I wanted to be in the Olympics for it. Climbing was like
Oh
so
yeah,
far from being in the Olympics though that I was still like as a kid, I was like, I'm gonna be an Olympian. I'm gonna be an Olympian in this sport, even though we didn't know that climbing was going to be in the Olympics. And when it happened, of course, I was like, oh, wow, I could actually be an Olympian in this sport if I wanted to be, um, if I tried really hard and dedicated towards that. But even at that time, I was like, I'm going to be an Olympian. At the same time, climbing's culture had a very opposite look on it. If you were serious in climbing and you really wanted to take it seriously, like careful competing, that's not real climbing, And so I got told that a lot. We had a lot of like older climbers at Sunnyvale, and like people were not afraid to share their opinions back then, about climbing in that way. And so I got told a lot, like, what are you doing? Like, when are you going to go outside? Like, I would get this asked almost every week, almost every single week for like years and years. Like, Tim, like, when are you going to go outside? And I was like, I go outside. Like, I actually do go outside. So to share like what climbing outside looked like for me. Well, Isaac did back then there was not that much difficulty like climbing with your team outside. Nowadays, it's tricky. I wouldn't say that people don't do it, but if you do it, you can be under a lot of crosshairs, right? Because you're hanging out with kids, and you're probably like sleeping in Airbnbs with kids or whatever, or like for me, like I was in the car with an older person or whatever. Like all that stuff nowadays, unfortunately, is pretty under the crosshairs. But back then, it didn't matter. Like if your parents trusted this older individual, like you could probably go hang out with them in Bishop for 2 weeks, which is what happened my first time out. But the very first thing that we did was one of the team girls had a birthday party at Castle Rock, and that was the first time we went out. And so it was a big team thing, like lots of people with lots of experience, lots of people with like no outdoor climbing experience. It made it really comfortable to like try a bunch of stuff. We tried the spoon right away. We tried Bates Red. I got shut down. Like we tried a bunch of like all the stuff. Like I did the swim. Like remember the first time out there, and like that was super hard. It was V3, and I was like, dang, like this stuff is so much harder out here. And having an atmosphere where like everybody was just having fun, like we tested so hard in the climbing gym, like we tested so hard in the gym and like in the competitions, that even though like when we pulled on, like I think we were all individually testing ourselves, the atmosphere wasn't like that, and it was like that every time we went outside together as a team. And I remember Isaac being with me the very first time I went to Bishop. um, and my first time going to Bishop was kind of interesting. Like, I knew the team was going out there. He had told me, and a girl that I liked at that time told me that they were like doing, they do usually like annual trips to Bishop as a team. Like in New Year's, time, they go for like 2 weeks as a team. And I was like, that sounds epic. And like, I know Bishop. Spectre is in Bishop. Like, I want to go to Bishop. Literally, that's all I thought about. Um, and yeah, so I wanted to go really badly with them, but it didn't make sense. I didn't know them very well to like jump in and be like, hey, can you guys take me for 2 weeks or whatever? So it just so happened I knew this other group of climbers. And maybe I won't share their names, but they decided to go to Bishop as well during that time, and they decided to take me. And they took me with them. There was two like maybe guys in their 20s, maybe one of them was a little bit younger, but we were all like good friends, and they were like more outdoor climbers. Like this is what they did, was they just went outdoor climbing all the time. So they decided to take me. Well, I joined my team most of the time, and these two other guys would go on and do their thing a lot. So it was already like I was kind of disconnected from their group. But then they wanted to bail. Like a couple days into the trip, they were like, like we'd rather go. I think it was really cold in Bishop, so they wanted to go to like the gorge or something. They wanted to go spend time elsewhere, and they were like we're taking you probably with us because like we have to, right? And I was like, oh, like I really want to stay with the team. I've had like a couple of really amazing days with the team, and it was just like I really wanted to stay with the team. So I remember as a 14-year-old going to Isaac and asking, I was like, hey, like, is there a chance I could stay here with you guys? We were camping. I was like, is there a chance I could, like, get a sleeping bag and a tent with you guys? And he was like, dude, 100%, sure. And he just, like, made it happen. He's like, go call your mom and, like, see if she's cool with it and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I totally expected it no. I called my mom, and she was like, "Oh, like not psyched on it, because I was already changing groups." But she was like, "Okay, I trust Isaac. Like you guys could just figure it out and do your thing." And I was like, "All right." And I was like, "Mom," my mom said yes. And I remember Isaac like really taking it, sticking it out there for me, because a lot of people were like kind of uncomfortable with it. His girlfriend was, uncomfortable with it, but it just made it work. And I had just the most spectacular Bishop trip of my entire life. Was my first time out there and doing much of the Druids for the first time together as a team. Like way up, like massive hike, just like being out in the cold together all the time. And so like that was my outlook on climbing outside, was like, this is for the team. This is for like us to go and vibe together, have experiences together, like struggle together and find challenges, because we were always jumping projects and stuff. And basically after that, I don't think I did another team trip, quote unquote team trip to Bishop, but I started to like make team trips, and I started to like, get groups together and like try to just keep doing that same feel that we had for many, many years. And because I was competing all the time, and because my year was set up like that, I really only went outdoor climbing like Thanksgiving and New Year's. That's pretty much all I went outdoor climbing for a long time.
Isn't it funny how a trip like that really can just set the tone for your life? And you made a little
Yeah.
comment how things like that kind of are in the crosshairs now, where it's not as appropriate.
Yeah,
And it is a shame. I mean, I understand why things are like
for sure.
that, and especially as a father now with like a young daughter. I can understand. But I remember being a kid, and we would go competitions together as a team, and we'd go in my coach's like old VW van. There'd be no seat belts. We'd be like going over the I remember sitting on a stool like in the back of a van, like just so dangerous. And I remember my parents somehow allowed me to go on this trip to Rifle for 2 weeks, with my buddies Vic Copeland, Dustin Sabo, and they
Oh
were
wow.
16, maybe 17, and I was 11 or 12. And I can't believe my parents were just like, go for it. This is before cell phones too. You're just good luck out
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
so really cool to have those mentors around you that, I don't know, just, help you do that. So you, you may have gotten second to last in your first regionals, but Tim, you've had a lot of success in competition climbing. And so take me to a little more current day where it is it grew in your, I mean, yeah, how did competition grow so much in your climbing life that became like really one of the biggest things you did? And what was it, what maybe caused you to have more and more success in competitions over the years?
Ooh, that's a hard one for me to answer, so we're gonna try. But because the trajectory changed so much over the years, like specifically, most climbers who are pretty good at it as a kid start getting to like better climbing performance, like year 5, year 6, year 7. And so that's really for me like when it was like actually a question of when I wanted to pursue outdoor climbing versus competition climbing. Like a lot of my friend group was starting to make bigger choices, like specifically my best friend Brennan. He really wanted to go outside like only, right? And he was like he still competed with us every now and then, like when it made sense. But for example, he only did the open comps. Like he was like never going to do youth anymore. I don't know if he actually ever did youth. He can clarify that for me. I forgot. But he would do the open comps with us because they were like more for fun anyway. Like for all of us, they were like, we're not going to go and like win or make a semis or something. So we're just going to go and show up and like try to do our best like together. And so for us, until it wasn't like that, until like like me and Ross and like Sam were taking it super seriously, like Brennan would go with us like all of the time and it would be like really fun. But I chose to take competitions, even though I still had that outlook where I probably wasn't good enough. I still took it in that long term view of like, but when I am good enough, when I am strong enough, how do I want to set myself up today to like understand and learn the experiences that I have to go through now to like all compile and amount to who I'm going to be like later. And I saw climbing competitions like that early on. And so there was a degree to me where if I had ever stopped, like I stopped that whole compiling that I was doing. Like I was building a pyramid, you know, all my friends know this since I was a kid. I was building a pyramid of like information, of physical strengths, intuition, technical things, pressure experiences, like expectations, desires, all of that mixed together, the mental and the physical and the technical. I was building myself a pyramid so that I could show up to an event one day and like really boss it. Like I didn't care about just doing comps or like to be recognized at comps. I wanted to win them. I was very competitive. I wanted to be the person who I could say I was the best at something at any given point. I started to care a lot less about that. And that's why I'm kind of sharing like there's an interesting arc that happened for me where like I still was competitive in choices, but I started to care less about the result. I just wanted to like make the choices for me to know that I was trying to do that. And I think a lot of that was like realizing that like winning and losing was not always in your control. It took me a really long time to realize that like a lot of the time that isn't always like every factor isn't in your control. You can do your best and that's what you should be doing. But if you do your best and if you're lined up to win, you're going to win, and you almost have to like gamble like a lot and keep going for it and keep having a yeah, like a likelihood of this is going to get me to winning and funneling that to like yeah, like the choices that kind of get you there. Well, eventually I started to recognize certain things that like really hindered my ability and then like really gave me a lot of ability. And, that's a really general way of sharing like what I learned over time. And for me, I think it was like literally year 9 in climbing where I felt pretty comfortable like saying, okay, I think I understand what the training looks like to get to a comp. I think I understand what the mental prep looks like to show up at the comp. And then in the comp, how to deal with the emotions to do the comp and like do your best. And so if I did the training and if I did the mental prep and if I recognized what was happening in the competition, I would probably do very well. And that happened for like event after event after event for like a couple of, the recent years. And then the arc changed a lot more in the last like year or two because I got sponsored by a company that was pretty big and, that was through like an outdoor climbing thing, and like they're already sponsoring like Olympic competitive rock climbers. And so, the question, I think what's kind of like not so cool about like the competitive life of an athlete is that eventually you start to question your viability to be at the number one spot, and maybe it's not questioning, but you're like, should I make choices now through my entire year to really dedicate to being at that top number one spot? Like that has to be related to how you view that to be viable, you know, and like I started to question the viability of that. So I think a lot of me went towards my more like outdoor goals, and that taught me a lot about what was important to me again in climbing, you know, and that again that changed that's what affected a lot of the highballing and like media creation and whatnot.
I got to point out again that I love this ability for you to, or the ability you have to deconstruct all these things that go into competition climbing, where you broke it up into at least three or four parts right there. And I know that we could break it up into infinite amount of parts if we wanted, but just this idea of you have to work on all these different aspects. And then I know there's always a bit of a roll the dice on competitions. It's one of the things that you could say it's somewhat unique to climbing, but honestly, it kind of happens in all sports. Like even something really basic, like maybe the 100-meter sprint, you might think is just the same every time. But what if you get like a stomach bug the night before? Like
Hmm.
and so I just think that is an interesting thing about climbing that you pointed out, where you worked on all the constituent parts, but then you still have to show up and hope for the best. And I, you mentioned outdoor climbing. You've done a lot of really dangerous stuff in your pursuit of outdoor bouldering specifically. That is the where I'd like to go. But just before we go there, uh, Tim, you saw more success in competition in lead climbing, and I was kind of curious why you think that is.
Hmm.
And on top of that, and through that lens, I'd like to know from a seasoned competitor like you what the difference is between competitive sport climbing and competitive bouldering. And again, why you think you seem to have more success in lead climbing.
Okay. So it is pretty unique, even in like a lot of competitive climbers. You'll see the backwards happen. Like a lot more people are comfortable bouldering than they are lead climbing, and I think for one that amounted to it. I wanted to do something that was unique. I wanted to do something that like other people weren't doing. So that was a huge one. For whatever reason, so I did my first regionals in bouldering, and then I got very bad score, and then what sucks about that in youth is that the entire team starts to separate. After the regionals, the team separates into people who make it to divisionals, and they do bouldering training for the rest of the season, and then so on. Like from divisionals to nationals, those people are doing different things, and so you feel not so special, right? But for me, that was a big wake up call. I was like, "Well, Isaac, what is next? You know, like get me on the next group." He's like, "Sports season," and he's like, "You're old enough that you're going to compete in lead." And so he's like, "You got to learn how to lead climb in the span of like a couple of months and train and show up at this event because I know you want to do well." And I was like, okay, what do I need to do? And at that time, let me explain a little bit. You needed to do, if you were 16 years old, you could just take a lead test at Planet Grand and Sunnyvale, which meant that you can literally just go up any route that they picked or whatever. It could probably just be a very easy one. Just take your lead test. Like everybody else takes a lead test now. Like you got to know your knots, you got to know the safety checks, and you just like got to not make any mistakes. You can't backflip, you can't put your foot through the rope, that stuff. And you just do that. Well, if you were under 16, you basically couldn't take a lead test unless you were on the team. And then you can get a team lead card, but you could only do that when you were 14. Luckily, I was 14. And I was like, dude, what a crazy amount of rules. But if you want to take the team lead test, you need to go through a series of like checks before you took the test. And then the test was going to be on the hardest route in the gym, which at that time was like mid 13s. My very first time lead climbing, and I was like literally still bouldering like V5 or V6. Um, but I was getting better rapidly. Like I climbed V10 by the end of the first year climbing. So at that time, I think I was getting pretty good at climbing. But we started top roping a lot. And basically, what you needed to do was 15 mock leads, 15 mock belays, and then 15 leads or like top rope, like more of the serious lead. So basically, what you needed was three people to do any of these. And then you need to log them all in a notebook. And like somebody needed to be watching you. You need 45 pitches of like climbing or belaying before you took the lead test, and then you needed to make sure that the lead test was available. And so I was like, before any lead training, I needed to do all of this. I think I did it all in like a week with Sam. And we were like trying to pull every string. And I think they like let us pull some strings because they were like, these guys are really dedicated. Like they really just want their purple card. I was like, get me my damn purple card. Like I just want to lead climb. And yeah, I remember like doing, I think we did all of the climbs and the belays like within 2 days. And then we were like doing the test on that third day. And I remember like Nick just being like so giddy. He was like, "All right, what are we gonna throw Tim and Sam on?" And I remember like getting on. I remember getting on a 13B, I think, on one of the walls at Sunnyvale that were like kind of vert, and I fell on like the third draw. They're pretty psyched. They were like, "Hey, that was really good." And I was like, "Really?" I was terrified. Like, I think I'm gonna hurt myself. And then he was like, "Okay, let's just do one more." So we like get a real test. And I did another like 13C, same thing. I fell on like the third draw, but they were like, "Okay, cool, you passed." And I was like, "Thank God!" Like, I don't want to do that again. And basically after that, we were just, Isaac was just throwing me on any hard lead rig that I could get on. And I think just having that exposure early on, doing so much volume to test, doing all of the hardest climbs, and like, even though I was falling early on, being like, "Oh, that's not so bad," to like really go for it. And Sunnyvale set pretty hard lead. Like, after that, they started setting like really hard, like 514 pluses and stuff. But even back then, like the sequences that they would throw on were very, very difficult, like low on the wall. And just having like, yeah, Isaac belay, and like he was really good at belaying. Like at that time, I was just like getting soft catches and like able to project really hard stuff like low. I remember like after that, we had like a Smith Rock trip because we had the ropes divisionals in Bend. So I got to go to Smith with them and stuff. But anyway, all that to say, I learned how to lead climb like a month or two before regionals happen, like fully. I did like a couple of weeks of training, go to regionals, and I got third place, and I was like a movement behind second place, and then a hold behind first place, and I was just like, dang, like I think I understand this a lot better, and I'll tell you the reason why. So what what I recognized about bouldering was that I think like the amount of solving that I thought needed to happen, and the whole like tries mentality and like on-sighting and all that stuff just put a lot of pressure on the climbing itself. And it took me a really long time, literally until I think year 9, to understand how to distill the process to do a boulder problem in a 4-minute scenario with on-site. And so, and I've talked about this before. I think getting to a neutral headspace to like really solve, focus on the things that you should be focusing on, and actually committing to that is a process you have to practice. And I think that's what bouldering is. And I was really bad at that. But in lead, for whatever reason, giving myself time to like actually read the route, which is what happened to almost every comp. Read the route, think about it, move away from the route, think about it. And then knowing you have one try really helped, and like putting that consequence like really, really helped in climbing. And for whatever reason, it like never hurt. Like it never hurt me in lead. I felt pressure all the time. But for whatever reason, I turned that pressure into like, but you only have one try. And because I had so many like shower crying experiences where I was like, oh, I just want to make sure that this try is really good, I like actually just made that happen. But when I got to, actually, interestingly enough, when I started to do my first lead World Cups, that was the first time I really got nervous, and I really like started to boulder. I started to like boulder in these lead rounds, and I think I was still doing okay because I was like fit, like fit enough to do all right. I was placing in like the mid 30s, mid 40s usually at the World Cups. 26 make it to a semis, so like not terrible, but I knew I would like step off the rope and just be like, "What the heck was that?" Like I'd be super super upset and just be like, "I didn't even climb today, dude." Like just be super frustrated with it. Um, and yeah, that just kept like anytime you're frustrated, like you said, like that failure and that frustration like breeds a solving mindset. And so I kept thinking about it, and I almost needed to also go and try a hard sport route outside, and that's why I got kind of like addicted to doing Bad Girls Club, because I think the same thing with bouldering, like to know what you're capable of helps you line up what you should be able to do in a competition, right? And routes are very rarely that difficult in a competition. So, all that to say, like all of the factors about what lead climbing is in competition helped with my difficulties that I was dealing with, and I think people have that experience vice versa. A lot of people struggle in lead for the same reasons. That one try like really gets to people and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah, I remember being a kid and competing, and there was no bouldering competing back then. It was all lead climbing
I
or
didn't know
rope
that.
climbing. Yeah, yeah, there really wasn't any bouldering back then, or at least not that I remember. This is like JCCA, so like mid '90s, and I actually had to do top rope. They didn't allow us to lead climb until I think you were 13 or 14. Yeah, maybe it
Hmm.
was the same. Although
Exactly.
it's funny is that I started lead climbing at 9 or 10, and looking back on it, it's hilarious that they had no. I just took the lead test, or no, I did a lead class. I learned how to lead climb, and I took the test. And what also really surprised me, think back on it, is that I would belay my friends who were 16, 17, 18, lead climbing, and just to put your life in the hands of a 10-year-old. Although they said that they actually really liked my belays because I literally could not give hard catches because I was so, I was probably
Yeah,
60
yeah.
pounds And so I would just rocket up to the first clip, and they said, "Great play, man." Um, yeah, I remember being really stressed out on those competitions, Tim, because of that one try thing that you're just saying that you thrived on, which I find really interesting. And
Mm,
and I remember that I was just terrified that I would fall before in the first couple of moves. I just remember just being absolutely terrified that I would somehow slip, and I don't know, somehow that was the most terrifying thing for me. And then maybe I'd kind of
yeah.
fall into the flow. So I find it interesting that what you're saying is that when that pressure was on, you had one try that you were really able to show up for it. And I'd love to use that to segue into some of the time that you've gone outdoors and you've had lots of success taking many hard things. And I don't want to downplay any of those difficulties, like things like Spectre, which is V13, but to be fair, really doesn't get done as much as other V13s do. And anyways, I don't want to go in that direction because what really impresses me is your success on some of these high balls, and they're really near and dear to my heart because I've spent a lot of time in Bishop and I've seen these lines, and things like Ambrosia or Too Big to Flail, Too Big to Fail. Wait, yeah, Too Big to
Flail.
Fail. It's Flail.
Flail.
There
Yeah.
Flail. There's a Too Big to Fail in Yosemite, by the way, a V10.
Yeah.
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 Anyways, and it's tall. Um, and the reason why I want to go there is because I am someone who has spent a lot of time in Bishop. I consider myself an experienced climber, and I love danger as well. But things like those climbs are a level that is hard for people to really understand, even when they hear the numbers about how high they might be. When you stand underneath Too Big to Flail, uh, and also I think I told you that I've also looked down from Too Big to Flail because I
Oh,
did
nice.
Luminance, which is actually a fairly serious V9 highball to with a bad landing is kind of what makes it more serious. And I just felt viscerally the seriousness of that climate. And I know you have felt that seriousness much more deeply than I. And so, can you take us to that? I don't want to say transition because it's not like you have ever abandoned competition, but that's a very
Mm.
different headspace. It's a very different demand on the body and brain. And when did this journey begin, and how of climbing more serious lines in the danger world, and why the pursuit of it?
All right, I'm gonna try to understand a little bit as well for myself because this conversation is really fun because I'm like thinking a lot more about my climbing from the past, and there is a lot of significance to like little moments that I know were like at that time just again moments that we were living, but they amounted to me going and like taking it seriously. But I remember like a lot of the early stages of climbing. So this is extremely relevant, but me, Ross, and Sam McQueen, and Nate Linden, and Brennan, and my buddy Danny Seo, like we always were very competitive with each other in a way that we almost like looked for challenges that each of us individually could win. Now, Ross and Sam were like both just we knew that they were the best in almost every way and in every comp, any local comp, any big comp, they were winning it or at least beating all of us. And so logically for me, like I wasn't gonna lean that way so too much. I did a lot, and I was like, I'm gonna one day I'm gonna beat my buddy Ross. Like he can't win all of them, right? Right? Of course, he won so many comps in his earlier career between all of us, which were always so impressive because we would always get like what Josh Levin was always at those comps, Andy Lamb was always at those comps, like Solomon Barth was always at those comps, and back then they were pretty big names. And still big names. And so I didn't really think comp climbing was always going to be like the place that I would shine on a stage. And for I think someone like me who always wanted to shine on a stage and like be impressive, I needed to find a stage that like needed, that would showcase me. And the place that I always knew that people would shy away from was specifically outdoor top outs. And like anywhere we would go, like Tahoe, Tuolumne, even Castle, like there was always some top out that would scare somebody. And I would take the time to be like, okay, like I'm probably going to get there on one of these tries. So if I get there, what do I need to do to like really make sure that I keep going? Because I keep seeing people just stutter. Like I think Ford was the coach who like explained it as like the gecko. He was like, "Don't gecko, dude. Like, or like, don't lizard. Like, you get somewhere, and he's like, you know how lizards dance? They like have their hands and they just like they keep doing this with their neck. They keep going back and forth. He's like, climbers do that. Don't lizard." And I was like, okay, like, don't get up there and don't like second guess stuff, right? Like, don't do that. And I would obviously get up there and do that sometimes and be like, dang, like, what is it that's like getting me to do that? And because I had a desire to be the better one. I had a desire to like be, like take it seriously and get up there and commit. But then you get up there and you're like, oh, I know why people aren't committing, because if that blows, like, you're gonna windmill to the ground and stuff. So it was just like constantly getting intimate with the experience of topping out, getting really intimate with like the fear. And so it's never to say that I grew numb to fear. I never got that. It's never to say that like it didn't bother me. The danger is something that I liked, or like I like the adrenaline stuff. Like, I really didn't. I definitely felt pretty sick to my stomach in a lot of experiences that I've had. But I think I just recognized like small choices and like really funneled ways of thinking that would get you to do those things that you didn't want to do. And I just kept doing that. And I remember a couple of like really significant experiences of also specifically failure, where we would go to like Tuolumne. Tuolumne had really hard slabs and high balls and stuff. Tuolumne Meadows, like high elevation Yosemite area. And there was a couple times where we do trips with the group and just like show up at a V6. Maybe it was a hot, but like show up to a V6 or a V8. And at that time, we were all climbing double digits, and we like couldn't do them. And a lot of that was because they were so scary and like super difficult to solve, and it was sweaty, and you were like gonna hurt yourself if you fell. And just constantly running into those moments. And my buddies, a lot of them would like stop. They'd be like, it's not worth it. Like, I don't need to do that. So I'm not going to try to do it. And I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity for me to make it worth it. And just kept doing that over and over again. And then I think by the time I got to Bishop, I think I've shared this story before too, where like some of my earliest trips with Isaac, I remember asking him like, hey, do people actually go up these like big things? And he's like, yeah, yeah. And I was like, could I try like footprints? And he's like, you know, one day, but like not when I'm taking care of you. Like, not, I was like, okay, that's totally fair. And then I remember like really wanting to drive myself or driving with my friends to Bishop again so that I could try footprints and stuff. And I remember just like the freedom of like, if you ask your parents to like go do something dangerous with their supervision, they would never say yes, right? Like, logically, if my mom was right next to me, I'd be like, hey, can I like set up the rope on footprints? Why would she say yes? Right. But being there by yourself with your friends and just being like, how do I set the rope up on footprints, and just like making it happen, having that freedom, without like it's, you start to think about life your own way, and like, do I really want to do that? Like, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of danger, it's a lot of like knowledge to like go and set up, and well, it's not that much knowledge, but like for me, I didn't know anything, so I was like, I need a rope. Like, I was like, bouldering is just pads, like now I need a rope, like I don't know how to do that. And so I kept doing that thing, and did footprints like pretty early on. And then after I did footprints, I remember having like a really significant appreciation for what I had just went through, and knowing that it was heavy, and I was like very scared. My breath changed. Like, it was up there, compared to even the previous like 20-foot top outs, which are really scary. Like, for most people who've topped out boulders above like 15 feet, you really don't want to fall past that, right? Especially if you're doing technical things where you're like trusting feet and like doing strenuous positions, mantles, and weird stuff at 15 feet or above. You really don't want to do that. We'll climb 2 or 3 times above that height, and you're still doing similar things, and it's different. It feels like you're free soloing. It really feels, it's like, oh wow, if I make any error, any mistake, or any loss of focus here, I'm just effed. I'm like done. And I started to get really addicted to like, what I knew was that not that many people would want to do that, because I already experienced like at a much lower level people who were very talented and very strong just like totally shying away from that, and knowing that this was now a very unique world, and I just wanted to keep doing it. And at that time, Honnold was doing like, he had just done Too Big to Flail and like posted that, somebody posted that video of him like doing the whole process on it, and I was like, dang, like whatever I experienced on footprints, this guy's really experiencing at like a really, really hard level. And it just, it just kept going from there.
Footprints is a really tall V9 on Grandpa Peabody, that famous boulder that you see when you drive up to the buttermilks. It's it's V9 because of some moves down low, and then you get to maybe like a V2 slab move at, I don't know what that is, maybe 40 feet.
Yeah.
Very probably. I wouldn't be surprised if you die if you blow that move.
Yeah. Me neither.
Um, I'm guessing that that wasn't your first quote unquote highball. Um, you know, what were some of the stepping stones that you remember? You kind of said, oh, you know, people would freeze at Castle Rock on. I mean, even the spoon is like this tricky V2 mantle. But you know, there's some other ones I can think of right by there. High Plains Drifter is scary. You know, it may not be 40 feet, but it's up there. I even think Bowling Pin Arret is a little exciting. I don't know if you remember doing that. It's a V4.
I've never done bowling pin
It's fantastic.
ever, but yeah,
Go
I've put
do it.
people on it. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely fantastic, man. Really an incredible climb with a little bit of a committing kind of finish. So, what were some of the, you know, I'm always interested in you've broken up climbing into all these different parts, and you have taken them seriously and progressed through them. And the way to progress is to progress one step at a time, maybe sometimes two steps an accident. But what did that progression of being able to handle dangerous things look like for you? Maybe a little before footprints.
So I think a lot of it was I remember High Plains Drifter being the first big and for me pretty hard climb that I did in Bishop back then. And I remember like pulling the lip halfway, where you like transition from like the hard climbing into like the easy top out and looking down the whole time and just being like appreciating it and just being like, dang, that's big. Like, but I was actually extremely unsatisfied at how easy it was after that. In like once you did the super hard V7 to get to the jugs, I was like, dang, but I want to do this, but with like a similar pushing, And that was the very first time I was like, this highballing thing is cool, but at the same time, it's like not that cool if it's too easy. And so for whatever reason, I also never did Southwest Arret, which is like the classic highball on the grandma Peabody boulder on the like the it's like V2 or like five
Oh, the
nine or
five
whatever
nine.
people call
Yeah.
it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I have done it many times, but after that. But again, I wasn't using mainstream or like at that time, like everybody knew. It's like, oh, you do the highball Southwest Arret. And so I always shied away from when people said, you just do that. It's like the thing you do. And I was like, well, I just did High Plains, and High Plains had a very similar look to what Southwest Arret is. And so I don't think it's going to be stimulating in that way. Like I think it needs to be a little bit dicey. I was also doing like I remember the hunk took me like a lot of tries, and it was really really hard, and it was very scary. And I remember like looking at the hunk and looking at footprints, and being like, they're the same climb. Like, can you imagine doing the hunk 40 feet up? Like that'd just be so messed up. And it wasn't the I think the slab on footprints is a lot easier than the hunk in a lot of ways, but it was a lot of those small experiences. And I remember also trying Fall Guy, which is the stand start to Haroon in the Sea of Stories. So Fall Guy's a V9, and it's pretty long. It's like a pretty tall climb, but there's a rock behind you the whole time that like follows you up. And I remember like getting scared on that one. I actually sprained my ankle on it on one of the trips trying it because I like bailed and then I kicked the rock behind me. And my foot got stuck and it like hyperextended my ankle. I remember just trying a bunch of stuff that was like really hard. It was a mixture of trying slabs that were like surprisingly hard, and then like climbs that I thought I should be able to do, but getting really scared on them. And then footprints really was like a pretty early one, and I think it was because I got to get on a rope. It was because at that time, like the day I was doing it, a bunch of people were trying it. My friend Manny was trying it. This guy from Switzerland, Matthias, was trying it. Kenny Barker was trying it. It was his rope on it, and like I've never really, even now, seen four people trying footprints the same day. That made it really easy for me to be like, cool, we're just gonna go and try it. I actually didn't for almost all the highballs that I've done. I usually didn't have like a plan to do it, and it usually actually would happen the day I was trying it, where I would just be like, I think this is good enough. I think we're cool enough to just like do it now. And footprints was very much like that, where I didn't necessarily have a plan to do it until I was on it, and then I was like, okay, cool, now we can do it, right? So having like a lot of desire and dream, and then pulling on, and then being like, cool, I think I can do this, and then going for it was really what the arc was truly like.
Well, for everyone listening, you can go and see Tim's video focus that it's on the Black Diamond channel. Is that where it is?
YouTube,
YouTube.
yeah.
Just a really wonderful film, kind of showing the culmination of this pursuit so far. I know that's just it's been a couple of years, but still is a really just good visual example of what you're talking about. And I know that you do a lot of breathing technique. I know breath work is something important to you in climbing, and I think visualization is something that you've talked about a little bit before, and I'm curious how you use those tools in highballing, and it might also be interesting to contrast that in how you use those tools in another high pressure situation, which is competition climbing. Are those things that you routinely employ when you do highballing and
Mhm.
competition?
Yeah, for sure. So this is a nuanced topic, but I had a lot of conversations early on with one of my coaches named Adriel Rodriguez, and he had a strong appreciation. He was a track and field coach, I think, for a long time, and he has a very strong appreciation for Bruce Lee, and so did I. And we talked a lot about flow. And Ross and I have talked a lot about flow. Like flow is very crucial to Ross in a lot of ways, and like I think we had both a very deep appreciation for it and maybe different approaches to like achieving that. Um, but flow was really important to all of us, and I think what we understood about flow was that it really was a mode where your best would come out every single time, and if it was directed, you could like sometimes just like not fall. You could just do what you're supposed to do. You would reach for everything necessary to get stuff done. And in my opinion, flow is a mixture of, or in my experience, really, flow really was an understanding of things, an awareness of things, a lot of training to like direct your body's intuition to do things. Like you need a serious amount of volume and intensity in your repertoire, like you already done them to access that flow again in like crucial moments, right? So training is really key to it, but also like a mental side and awareness. And so breath work and visualization was really the setting up to allow flow to happen, right? If you didn't have that, good luck having flow was like really what I thought. And there are many moments where I don't visualize properly or enough, and I like get out of the moment and I'm like, this ain't gonna be good anymore. I have to like really get back into the zone, and breathwork was almost like a directive to get into that zone. And I still to this day like use breathwork as much as possible. I was a lot better at it when I was like practicing it a lot, but a lot of it is to like keep you, it's keeping you in that flow state, right? And yeah, Ross recently did something with prana, I think, that like talked about the breath and how much practice he has in the breath and how much that applies to the flow state. And again, I think maybe we have like different highlights of like what that flow state allows, or maybe not. Maybe he would see it the same way. But like I said, I think when you've practiced for a really long time, when you study for a really long time, and you have formed good, maybe hopefully accurate definitions of what is likely good or best in climbing movement, and then you take your time to like see what you're supposed to do on the wall. You take your time to like prep it and like really, and that prep is super key. It has to do with my pro tip a little bit. Um, but once you have that, then you can access that flow. Like I think a lot of my confusion early on in climbing was like to try to access that too early. But honestly, I started to stray away from that and just like work and just like take a lot of sessions to be like, cool, I don't need to flow in this session necessarily, or like maybe I can find a moment or two this session to have it. But most of it should be to like set up so that when I need to flow, when I really need to have that moment of flow in the high ball or in the competition, in a specific moment, I can access it then. And I really started to change my outlook on climbing a lot more towards like put in the work and then like cash in like specific moments. And I had to form a lot over time.
When you visualize highballs and you're going through your sequencing or just visualization before getting on, what's your self-talk like about the exposure? I guess your visualized, however we want to put it, because visualization, I think we often think of as just being like literally a visual component in your brain. Like I'm going to see this crimp and grab it like that. But I don't think that actually encompasses what it actually feels like to visualize something, because
Hmm.
there's like a projecting of yourself into this moment. And
Hmm.
I'm just curious what what your self-talk like is, or what your feelings are when you're visualizing yourself 50 feet off the deck or 40 feet off the deck, and pulling serious moves with serious consequences. How does that look before you pull on?
It's very similar to how you just asked the question. But let's all take a moment to visualize ourselves, whether you're driving in your car, you're doing dishes, or you're hanging out at the gym. Let's take a second to just like visualize ourselves on the thank God ledge on Half Dome. We're Honnold. We've just climbed like 1,000+ feet to get to this thank God ledge. We have no rope. We have no exposure. We have a couple of pretty hard pitches in front of us, and like we can feel the wind, but we know that if we like make a mistake or we let go, we're plummeting 1,000+ feet to the ground. And I think like when you, what's the motion that you feel when you're like on that ledge?
Really, really present, like really
Hmm.
feeling that rock underneath my feet, like, leaning back, like just like feeling every little crystal. Like that's when I think about things like that, I know I'm just really there.
So for me, when I feel that, I feel that as well. I think I feel extra of like what I actually am already feeling, but my main emotion is usually like butterflies. It's usually like even now when I'm thinking about being on the thank God ledge, I instantly get like sucked into my stomach, and I'm like, oh, like that's really heavy. And maybe it's because I've been in a lot of those situations of like consequence, and I've done enough of those positions to know like usually it is always a butterfly feeling. And so when you're talking about visualization and it's a projection of yourself on the wall, it's a lot more accurately like that. And so when you get good enough at climbing to know that you can sequence, like visualize sequences all of the time, that becomes a given. Like you shouldn't always be thinking about, in my opinion, it's not always helpful to just you're not going to know exactly what you're supposed to do. Like a lot of climbing is feeling in the moment and like making your best choice, right? Because unless you've tried something 1,000, there's a reason why people try things 1,000+ times to be able to do the thing that they can do at the limit, right? Like chances are you're not going to find it unless you really feel it, right? And so there's a huge aspect of that in climbing, and I recognize that. So there's no point in for me when I'm visualizing to just be like, oh yeah, I should do this with this hold and like it's gonna feel like this. There's a degree to that, like I said, but really what I'm focusing on is the emotion, is that pit feeling in my stomach, is the butterflies, where I'm like, dang, like what is it? But what does it actually feel like to feel all of these types of things? And so then I go through all the processes of things that I might run into, which is the exact same thing that I do in competition. It's just that like it's a different emotion that occurs on a high ball. And that's what I've just noticed over time. I've just learned this. Like if I sequence, for example, in a nationals final, where I do really want to win or like get at least make it to US team or something, or like be in a good contention, I know I have to get pretty far, but there's like certain instances on the climbing wall where I'm like, there, if you mess this up, like it's gonna feel like this, it's gonna add some pump for you. So, if you do this here and you're gonna get there pumped, you have to make slightly different decisions in pacing and like rests and whatnot. Like you plan all that stuff. If you're really good at like sport climbing or like, sequencing, you plan all that stuff ahead. You run in through all the situations that might occur. And in highballing, it's no different. And so when I look at like specifically climbs like Ambrosia and specifically climbs like Too Big to Flail. And the reason why they're a little bit different than like Evolution or Footprints is because you have more time on Evolution and Footprints. You have a lot more time out of heat, and heat being like whatever it is. For me, it's recognized more as like full engagement on your body where you just cannot just chill and relax. And so there's like very few moments on either Ambrosia or Too Big to Flail, if any, where you're like totally relaxed and like able to regroup and like make new decisions. So you have to be in that set flow for your entire, I don't know how long it takes most people to climb those things, but for me it's like several minutes. And so it's a totally different visualization. Like, do you know what you're going to feel like after being on the wall in heat for a minute, and then you get to this section that even though you've done it on rope, like now it's a totally new emotion. And in my opinion, the more intimate you are with that stuff, the easier it is to access the flow. And so and I've just done enough in a bad headspace or like a slightly less optimal headspace. Like I've done Too Big to Flow twice. And the first time I did it, it gained a lot of information for like how I want to visualize it the second time. And it actually made it really hard because I was like, dude, that part sucks. Like there's not that much that can give you more, and now I've said, like I said it before when I first did it, I didn't really want to do it ever again. Well, now I know I for sure don't really ever want to do it again because it's just so much. Like, you can't really handle that stuff. Like again, visualization is to prep, to like anticipate as much as possible what you're gonna feel. Well, if you can never fix that, it's not really stuff you want to feel too much ever again. And so it's a lot of that. It's just like anticipating even the sweat, like the sweat that you might be feeling right now, like that I'm feeling just thinking about these moments. Like you have to anticipate that stuff.
I just realized that you probably have the first ascent of doing Too Big twice. Like I'm guessing no one else has climbed it twice. That's kind of
Actually, Nick Muehlhausen did the luminance block in a day before
oh
I did
wow.
focus. Yeah, so I think that was the second time he had done it. But yeah, he's like a crusher. He's a local, like he's serious highballer. But thanks, I have the second repeat ascent of Too Big to Flail.
Mm. Uh, so I hear what you're saying, and something that I feel like we're painting a picture, or you're painting a picture of things going really well up there, but then you kind of had a hint, or you kind of said something about when a tall climb doesn't go well, or when you don't have the right mindset. And in that Tim's Best Day podcast we did so long ago, that was something that really stood out to me, was that things didn't all feel perfectly. It wasn't this magical dance that you had rehearsed that you just then executed, and it was great. And wow, like I'm glad I practiced that 500 times, and this 501st time was just like the 500th time. So what do you do, Tim, when you start finding yourself in a bad headspace, in a place where consequences matter? And I would say this still matters in competition climbing. And it's something I'm always interested in, where a lot of us have done things that are dangerous or scary or high pressure, but we haven't done them so much, where I often find that there's two types of people. There's people who have been under high pressure situations and they came out of it and it was great. And then there's people who had high pressure situations and said, this isn't for me, and it was awful. But I know that people who stay in that realm for long enough have multiple sensations or multiple outcomes, that it wasn't always perfect. And so what tools do you use, or what happens when things don't go so well, Tim, and you're in the thick of it?
That's really interesting, because a lot of my approach to things is just to make sure as much as possible that you don't run into that situation. And so my answer is a little bit weird, where I think honestly it's more of the prep work to like show up, because I have had very very few moments on highballs where things go wrong, because I don't usually go until I'm very convinced of like all sorts of things. And then if things go wrong in the moment, I just try as much as possible to lean in and distill to the things that I can really focus on, and things that I know amount to as much of a likelihood of success as possible. And it just so happens for me that that stuff has usually gone pretty well after that. And so like, you basically like have a first approach at like, okay, I'm gonna go and bulldoze this thing because I'm strong and I'm technically good and I know my sequences. And then when stuff happens, you have your list of things that you should go down. And I like that you said competition, because it's a little bit more accurate to like what actually happens more often. Because again, in highballing, I really won't pull on too much until I'm like pretty confident that I can do something. But in comps, like sometimes things just happen, and you're on climb number 4, and you're like, well, I gotta keep going. And I think it's the same. It's the same approach though, where like you just keep leaning into the things that have happened, and less so to answer the question, but more like something I've realized about that over time is that these experiences, like I agree with what you're saying. Like I think a lot of people like have different outcomes with like them going through a certain experience. But I've chosen to believe that life is about those outcomes, for me at least, and I just go through them. Like if they're just in front of me, they're a smart opportunity or a good opportunity for me. It's an opportunity that makes sense. It feels right. I just go for them. And then what I've realized over time is that I learn more about myself through those than in any other situation in life. In any other situation in life, I could never learn that much about myself. And some stuff's not so cool. Some stuff is like stuff that I'm not super, super proud of. I'm like, oh, that's me. Like, that's who I am. Like, okay, like maybe this is something I want to work on, like maybe this is something that I want to change about myself. And it gives you an opportunity to look at yourself and be like, I want to be a different person, and like specifically for me in climbing and highballs and in competition, I wanted to be a person who didn't react poorly to things. I wanted to be a person who stuck to what I believed in, like no matter what, and was able to back those thoughts up with the choices that I make. And that's really hard. Like, you don't realize what you react to until you're reacting to those moments, right? Until you're like placed in a situation. If I just plopped a bunch of different people halfway up too big to flail, we would then see what people are really made out of, right? And like that's what I was addicted to in testing myself on highballs, was to see if I was made of those things. But what really happened was afterward I realized like what I was made out. And so a huge part of me was proud of a lot of things, of course, like I'm glad that I walked away sort of unscathed. But as some of and like even talk about it in that Tim's Best Day, like it really affected me a lot, like doing that day. And through that effect I learned maybe some things that I wanted to prep more before I do something like that. And so it just keeps teaching me, like my mom used to always ask me like after every comp, like how did it go? And I usually would lose or like not do what I wanted to do. And I'm like, the thing I would tell her most often was, it didn't go so well. Like I think I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned so much. And she would like be sad with me until I said that. And then she'd be like, "Oh, well, that's good. Like that seems like a worth it experience then. Like, next time you can take that and hopefully you don't have to walk away with just a learned experience. You can be happy." But I learned that that's what every experience is like.
That's interesting. It makes me think that that through line between competitions and highballs for you is that you learn the biggest lessons in your life by putting yourself into the hardest situations you can find. And yeah, I don't know. Am I saying that correctly?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize that was what I was like directing myself to do, but the experience, the feeling of it, and like what was happening throughout my life, I just kept leaning into it. I was like, I like that. Like I'm learning more about myself than I just recognized that no other situation in my life that I knew of would teach me. And I've lived a different life. I'm 25 now, and like lived through different things. And I don't have to share all those things, but it's helped me a ton. Like it doesn't make anything that much easier for sure, but it helps you to recognize that life is kind of about that, in lots of different ways.
You hurt your knee pretty seriously back in December. I think it was December or
Mm.
November. So yeah, it's a pretty serious injury that you're still not 100% from. You did not do it highballing or in competition climbing, but it was a serious injury nonetheless. And I'm curious if that experience has changed how you view doing highballs because although uh, although danger was ever present, maybe you had not had the consequences from highballing hit you. And again, I know this injury was not from highballing, but how has that injury shaped your feelings about danger and even just climbing as a whole?
That's a good question, Joshua. Um, I think what you're getting at is something that I'm just learning about myself, where the reason why my recent injury has hurt me so much mentally, and like a part of my ego, is because I wasn't doing anything that was like really testing myself. And I wasn't doing something that like if I came out the other like it was a consequence that happened to me with like no real specific drive towards it or anything. It was just like an accident that happened. And because I've thought enough. It hasn't. My answer to you is that it hasn't changed my look on highballing consequences whatsoever. But some things have changed it, and I can go into that a little bit. But the reason for that is because no matter when I've done a highball, I go through the consequences, and I already know that even if I die doing a highballing thing, and you can look at me in any way you want to, I don't care. Like as morbid as it might be, like I was okay dying, like in any of the situations that I put myself in dying, and because it equated to exactly what I wanted out of life and climbing. Like if I didn't put myself through that, like what was I living for? It was a lot of like what I thought about for a long time. And I had to go through like many long drives by myself, like many moments in Bishop climbing by myself and really agreeing to myself that that's what I really wanted. And it was never difficult. It was always like, yeah, like life wouldn't be very meaningful for me if I didn't go through these things, even if I died. So if I died, that was like for me my meaningful life, and like I was okay with that. But hurting myself doing something that wasn't super meaningful, that hurt a lot more. And so I think the thing that I'm learning about highballing is that it better be really important for me to like put myself in those situations, because if I hurt myself doing something that I might just like not care about that much, or it didn't really mean that much for me, that's what would affect me like a lot more. And so I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm definitely gonna do another highball probably in my life. I'm definitely have like sights towards something that probably will push me out of my comfort zone more than it ever has. It probably will happen, and uh, it won't happen though if it really doesn't mean that much to me in that moment. And that's something that I can feel very confident saying, and I've lived that way for my entire life. So
Man, you made me think of a scene in, I think it was in Free Solo, where Honnold is talking to his maybe then girlfriend, now wife, and I can't remember the scene so well, but just the gist of it was this deep understanding by Honnold that no, I'm risking my life. Like I know exactly what it is, and it's really hard to explain to someone, I don't know, I don't know if he was the most eloquent in explaining it, why he might pursue that when, you can say like, hey, Tim, hey, Alex, you've got friends, you've got family, you've got love in your life. What are you even out there doing? And, what's the point? And, it's interesting connecting that to what you just said, where when you put yourself into these situations, it's when you learn the most about what life is. And so I don't know, that's interesting to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Could
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
could I take that and say something really quick on that?
Please.
Because that's really important. I think like Honnold is definitely a you know someone I look up to, in a lot of ways. And he's got his memes and stuff, and he's maybe not the best at explaining those types of things, and maybe a little bit like I don't care about certain things. But he seems like a very cool guy, and I haven't really had too many conversations with him. But he seems like a really cool guy. And one thing that I do respect about his approach to climbing, and like specifically climbing, but then also highballing or free soloing, is that he lived for himself. Like it, even with those conversations with his girlfriend. And I think I was like, well, yeah, I don't want to say that, but um, I think everybody should live for themselves. And you should, I think I have a lot of compassion in my heart for other people, and like trying to do as much as possible to like, help others and do things for other people. But that's because I live for myself. And I think if people don't live for themselves, for one, they can't go into the extremes and like, learn themselves very well, and like try keyword there, try to like achieve their dreams, which, is almost like you need to have that fuel behind you to be able to do that. You need to care about yourself and like what you really want out of life. And like, dude, I don't know, ever since I was young, and like, I got into some different life situations, but almost always like what I came to realize and think about, and something I think about still to this day, and like will think about for the rest of my life. And I definitely is part of my pro tip, but everyone should think about their lives in this way, where it's like your life is finite. My life is finite. I will die one day. I will not be able to like wake up and get up and do my choices, right? Even if I'm like not dead, even like I'll one day be too old or like too weak or fragile or whatever to like do what I want to do. And so when I get an opportunity to do that, I just want to be one, ready to do it the way I want to do it. And so that takes a lot of prep and work and like practice and training, and a wide enough scope on life to be able to see it that way, and like every choice that you make and fuel it, right? But then also like in those moments actually enjoy it, like not do it for somebody else, because that's not very enjoyable. And so people have talked to me a lot about like inauthenticity when it comes to highballing and stuff, and it's like, no man, if you've ever done that, if you've ever like stepped off on a highball, you probably know whether you're doing it for yourself or not. And I can comfortably say I do it for myself. And of course I've like capitalized in certain moments to like make it cool, or like make it, maybe financial in some way. But honestly, like it has nothing to do with like my drive towards it. It has all to do with the stuff that we've been talking about. And so living for myself was like, and for Honnold living for himself is like, I think just shows you so much more about the choices that you make and like why you make them.
I totally understand how when you step off into the unknown where the consequences are really serious, that it automatically shines a light on your intentions, because you're just alone, and all of a sudden you've never been more alone. And so whatever is inside of you is yelling very loudly, or you can hear it very clearly. Do you have any experience or tips for people on how to know if that voice, when you're listening to the right voice versus, one that is coming from a place that maybe is going to lead you astray and isn't you living for yourself?
I think what I can share is that when you put yourself in those moments, just pay as much attention as possible. You start to like, it's what you're saying, like once you pull on and you're really alone, things will happen. And so if you do a lot of prep, I think, and you like are visualizing well, what will probably happen is you receive a lot of information on like how you feel and like how things are going and like how things might go and stuff. But if you're not getting that information, it's too strong, you're probably not ready. You're probably not ready to be there and like step off and, reassess, get on something easier. Like I've had to do that many times, like I put myself in many, many, many padless moments on like easier things and like less consequence things. And that's when I sorted it all out. I'd just be like, do I really want to be here? Like, is this what I want to do and stuff? And a lot of the time it was like very slow. It was just like a lot of those moments in Bishop by myself climbing, or like I'm not by myself climbing all the time, but like, on the wall, I'm by myself and like being on the wall, I just sit there and think and like a lot of it's appreciation. Like a lot of it, I grew up very religious, Christian, and that's mostly when I would feel like the strongest spirituality and like the most religious would be on climbing moments where I'm like so appreciative of like what I have and like what I'm able to experience. And through that appreciation, I just like be more like visceral in the moment and just be like, what am I feeling, and like what's the wind like? What's this texture like on my shoes and my hands and the chalk? And I would say like anytime you're in those moments, if you're not able to like listen to what's going on, you're not ready. And so and I've been in those moments, where I'm not ready and I'm like, cool, get off. Like you can come back another time.
Yeah, I'm glad you detailed that because I wanted to extend it beyond just are you ready for serious consequential dangers in climbing versus just there's other ways to live for yourself and believe in yourself that don't have to be super dangerous, right? It can be
Yeah.
a myriad of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Tim, let's start wrapping up. And I know you have a pro tip, but I also wanted to ask you what you think is the difference between good and great climbers.
So it's a lot of what we've been talking about and uh my pro tip and the idea from going to good to great is very like in line. And I'll just start with my pro tip because always a little bit easier and just more straightforward. But when we were young, I think this came from somebody on the other team. There was like two major teams in the Bay Area. There was the Planet Granite team, and then there was the Zero Gravity team, which was the Touchstone team. And I remember hearing from I think like Matt Grossman or Mirko, some good athletes from Zero Gravity. They were saying that their coach told them to train like you compete and compete like you train. And I think like I took that to heart, but also like changed it for myself. And that's not my pro tip necessarily, but it's similar. Where for me to train like I competed was to get into that headspace. And it's almost like I don't know if you've ever taken like a standardized test, like or a driver's test or something. Like you hopefully probably like get yourself into a mindset before you go and take that test. Like everything in front of you, like all the little choices, you got to double check them. Like everything's going to be serious. Like I would recommend my pro tip is to invite that prep mentality into every single session. That's what I took from training like you compete. And then when I go and compete, I just like do the same thing, right? I make sure that I double check all my knots, like everything like that, like double check my sequences, like take them really seriously, put in effort. Like it just encompasses everything about like trying hard and like putting in focus and effort into something. Whatever you think that is when you're taking an SAT test or something, why don't you do that in all of your sessions? And it's not to say that every session should be performance, right? Because we've talked about that on our podcast. Like in some ways you shouldn't, but even when I'm just doing like drills and stuff, I still take it that level of seriousness every single time that I go in session. And I think that that's a pretty underrated thing. And so to go on from what I think makes you go from good to great, it's even deeper than that. And I think it's worth your life if climbing is important to you or anything is important to you and it's a part of your life, whatever you do, and you want to make it serious to yourself. You want to look back on your book of life and be proud of the chapters that you have lived and that you've made those choices to live that way. If you're that type of person, I think you only owe it to yourself to form your identity around that. And I hope that's what a lot of our, you know, this interview with me or talking and sharing about a lot of my experiences kind of show is like for me at least, and what made climbing really meaningful to me and makes it meaningful today and helped me progress the way I wanted to progress was believing in myself and like who I wanted to be and making like constant adjustment towards that, but still with the same attitude towards I just want to be the best that I can be. Whether when I was young, it came from wanting to be an impressive individual to whoever, or to understand what true mastery was in climbing and like really lean into that. Nowadays, what I care about and what I've cared about for a long time is just being able to show up to any moment and any challenge and do my best. and I still live with that identity, and that's the identity I choose to go in. And that's what helps me like fuel every session or fuel every, climbing session in the training gym or like going outside and doing whatever. Like that's why, a lot of your questions about like the significance or the difference between like competition or training or going outside or whatever. For me, a lot of it was the same thing. It was just like recognizing a moment, recognizing what I was made of, and trying really hard, and then taking the learning afterward and adjusting myself. And I think the real difference for people who go from good to great are how well and how much they push themselves towards, how accurate that is, their relationship with themselves and the actual identity that they choose to be a part of. Like if you really believe yourself to be whoever you want to be, you're almost certainly going to make those choices. But if you don't, I don't know what you're doing. Like you can be in the gym, like everybody can be in the gym or be outside and do stuff, but like not have that identity backing it. And I've seen that, like, I've coached enough people and like young kids or like adults to know that not every day and not every moment for people, and including myself, like I tried really hard. That was the emphasis there to make sure that I had that identity feeling. But more cases than not, I've seen people like just do the motions and don't put that much belief behind it for themselves. And you really have to believe in yourself that you can be who you want to be and not be afraid to fail.
Well said, man. Well said. I really like that, because this idea of greatness being the best you can be versus kind of looking outside and saying the good climb this grade and the great climb this grade. It also connects to some of the things I've seen in the top, we'll just say climbers, because this is a climbing podcast, and they are archetypes of one. They are Dave Graham is different than Chris Sharma, is different than Adam Andra, and they're all great and they're very different. And I think you just pulled out why. It's because they're the best versions of themselves they can be, and that makes them those characters, not in comparison to someone else, just themselves at a very, very, very high level, at the best they can be. So I really like
Yeah.
that, man. That was cool.
Yeah. And one other thing, just to like kind of clean that up from, um, you can be the best that you want to be for somebody else, and that's going to look very different than being the best that you can be, because you're going to be happy with your life that way. And it's a confusing thing because most of the time we're driven in life by incentives, and it's hard, it's a difficult incentive to just do things because you're going to be happy with it. It's a very, very macro view on life, but I urge everybody to live like that in some parts of their life at least, or like sometimes to have that realization that one day you're going to die, or like one day you're going to be in bed and just like look back on your life and uh think long term enough to know what you would want to look back on, and you're going to live life that way so much better. Or at least I would want to live that way, and I have lived that way, and I've been pretty happy with a lot of my climbing life and experiences and journeys. And I'm not number one at the Olympics, but I'm still pretty damn happy, and who knows, maybe I might be, I don't know. I might change some things that I want to have to go that way. But it has you I for me, my future self, I better be doing those choices. And maybe that's why I'm not doing it, because I better making those choices mostly in terms of looking back on it and being happy with myself. And so if it doesn't align with me to do everything that I believe will take to get me to the Olympics, I shouldn't be doing that. I should be doing what I look back on and be proud of myself and be happy with myself and respect myself. And everyone's got different values in that way.
Love it, man. Okay, Tim, any anything you want to plug? I mean, we definitely talked about the focus film, but anything else you want to point people towards that just want more Tim in their life?
Oh yeah, we got classrooms, man. Like we got this Testpiece classroom thing. I mean, yeah, obviously I've been extremely grateful for this platform, and I appreciate Josh specifically to allow me to share some of these things. I know this one was pretty intimate to me, and I appreciate this place. So if you guys listen this whole way, and you guys like this type of thing, I really appreciate it, because it's just something that Josh and I like doing. But at the same time, like I said, I lived for me, but I want to help others a lot, and the classroom is like a great place to show up and have your own experiences, have your own questions, and try to line up in this type of concept. If you have literally this thing in mind, and this is a lot of the time when I coach others, like we just end up in this conversation, like how do you want to live, like what choices are you making, and what distracts you from that. And so if you guys want an atmosphere to be able to share, or ask, or just like learn, join the classrooms. It's $25 a month to support me specifically for this Patreon. And there's other tiers that you guys can join. But then you guys get access to 2 classrooms a month, maybe more in the future, I'm not sure. But it's an awesome group of people that we already have. We just go in and share some climbing video assessments sometimes we just ask big questions. Like we go from like talking about weight in climbing to route setting in climbing to like people specific videos. Like we go into all of it. And it's one of my favorite things that I've done for climbing.
Yeah, we really didn't we really didn't get into the fact that you've been a route setter, been a coach, been a high level coach for a long time now. I'm glad you brought that up. There's too much. There's always too much. But those classrooms, like you're saying, are just a great way to have that full gamut of climbing experience that Tim has gone through, where there's a focus on mentality, and then there's how's that come down to the day to day. And clearly, Tim, you are more thoughtful than most in your deconstruction of climbing and the love that you put into it. So check out those classrooms. I also just I want to I'm going to plug that Patreon, because there's now Testpiece shirts, and if you're a patron, then you get a discount on them. And I also just want to shout out, I was out climbing, and a bunch of people, I was out at Lost World, which is a really cool place up here in Tahoe. And I bumped into a bunch of fans and listeners, and just really appreciated how they approached me and what they said to me. And just, thanks for taking the time to say hi to me. I also want to shout out Noah, who is probably our youngest listener. She's 10 years old, and she's my daughter's best gym buddy, and she's a awesome psych climber and belayer.
That's
And
awesome.
Thanks, Noah, for listening.
Shout
And
out Noah.
yeah, and Tim, thanks for sharing as always. And this episode was a little different, but you'll be back with a more coach's hat on, with tackling specific problems, sometimes things that you encounter in the classroom. Because yeah, the thing I didn't really get to ask you about, and maybe we'll save it for next time, is the things that you see in your coaching consistently that frustrate you, or that you're impressed by, or just you've encountered, not just in your climbing life, all the trials and tribulations you've went through, but something that's special about coach is that they see everyone else's too, and gives them a 10,000-foot view that you're already good at taking, and then having those experience lets you share it with others. So thanks, Tim. That was awesome, man.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, that was a good time.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.